The bright studio lights of The View buzzed overhead as makeup artists put finishing touches on the hosts' faces. It was a Tuesday morning in October, and the energy in the studio felt electric. Whoopi Goldberg sat in her usual chair, flipping through note cards while chatting with her co-hosts about the day's topics. The show had been running for over 2 decades, and Whoopi had seen it all. Political scandals, celebrity meltdowns, and viral moments that would be talked about for years. Today's guest lineup seemed routine enough. A cookbook author, a fitness influencer, and then something special. A member of the British Royal Guard who was in New York for a charity event. Staff members had been buzzing about this guest all week. It wasn't every day they had someone from Buckingham Palace on the show, even if he was just a guard. The production team had done their homework. Guard Captain James Mitchell had served for 15 years, protecting the royal family through countless ceremonies and state visits. He had earned several commendations for his service, including a special medallion that he wore proudly on his uniform. The medallion wasn't just decoration. It represented years of dedication, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty to the crown. As the cameras prepared to roll, Whoopi glanced at her research notes. She had interviewed presidents, movie stars, and world leaders. A royal guard would be easy, she thought, maybe even boring. The audience loved when she pushed boundaries and asked the questions others wouldn't dare ask. That's what made her famous, after all. The warm-up comedian finished getting the audience excited, and the countdown began. 3, 2, 1. They were live. Whoopi delivered her opening monologue with the confidence of someone who had done this thousands of times. The first 2 segments went smoothly. The cookbook author shared recipes, the fitness guru demonstrated exercises, and the audience seemed engaged. Then it was time for the final guest. Guard Captain Mitchell walked onto the stage in his full ceremonial uniform. The red tunic, black trousers, and tall bearskin hat created an impressive silhouette. But what caught everyone's attention was the gleaming medallion pinned to his chest. It caught the studio lights perfectly, creating small rainbows as he moved. The audience applauded respectfully as he took his seat. Whoopi smiled her trademark grin and began with standard questions about his job and life in London. Captain Mitchell answered with the practiced precision of someone trained in public speaking. His responses were measured, respectful, and informative. But something about his serious demeanor seemed to rub Whoopi the wrong way. Maybe it was the way he sat so perfectly straight, or how he carefully chose each word. To her it felt stuffy and pretentious. She had built her career on keeping things real, on cutting through the formal nonsense that celebrities and public figures often hid behind. As the interview progressed, her questions became more pointed. She asked about the relevance of monarchy in modern times, about whether all the ceremony and tradition was just for show. Captain Mitchell handled each question with diplomatic skill, never losing his composure or showing irritation. The medallion continued to catch the light, and Whoopi found herself staring at it more and more. During a commercial break, she leaned over to her co-host and whispered something that made them both chuckle. The makeup artist quickly touched up everyone's faces, and they were back on air. With just a few minutes left in the segment, Whoopi decided to shake things up. She had noticed how the captain kept adjusting his medallion, clearly proud of it. In her mind, it was just another piece of fancy jewelry, probably given out like participation trophies. She didn't understand the weight of what it represented, or the sacrifices required to earn it. The studio audience sensed something was about to happen. There was a shift in the energy, the way there always was when Whoopi was about to go off script. Her co-hosts exchanged glances, recognizing the look in her eyes. They had seen it before, usually right before she said something that would trend on social media for all the wrong reasons. Captain Mitchell sat calmly, unaware that his most challenging moment in years of public service was about to unfold on live television, broadcast to millions of viewers across America. Whoopi leaned back in her chair and fixed her gaze directly on Captain Mitchell's medallion. The studio lights made it shine even brighter, and she couldn't help but smirk. To her, it looked like something a child might win at a carnival game. Shiny, oversized, and unnecessarily flashy. "You know what I'm curious about?" she said, her voice taking on that tone her regular viewers knew well. It was the voice she used when she was about to say something controversial. "That big shiny thing on your chest there, what exactly is that supposed to be?" Captain Mitchell looked down at his medallion, then back at Whoopi with a slight smile. "This is the Medal of Distinguished Service, ma'am. It's awarded to guards who have shown exceptional dedication and bravery in the line of duty." Whoopi let out a laugh that echoed through the studio. Exceptional bravery? For standing around looking pretty in a fancy hat? The audience shifted, uncomfortably in their seats. Some nervous giggles rippled through the crowd, but most people seemed unsure how to react. "I mean, come on," Whoopi continued, warming up to her theme. "You guys just stand there like statues all day. What's brave about that, and they give you a medal for it?" She gestured dramatically at the medallion. "Looks like something you'd get in a Happy Meal." The camera zoomed in on Captain Mitchell's face. For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, but something deeper. Pain, maybe, or disappointment. But his expression remained professionally neutral. Whoopi wasn't done. The audience's mixed reaction only encouraged her. "I bet they hand those things out like candy over there. Oh, you showed up to work today, here's a shiny medal. You didn't fall asleep standing up, another medal. Am I right?" She turned to her co-hosts, expecting them to join in the joke, but her co-hosts looked deeply uncomfortable. Joy Behar was staring at her hands, while Sarah Haynes kept glancing between Whoopi and Captain Mitchell with obvious concern. The energy in the studio had shifted dramatically. What had started as a light-hearted morning show was turning into something much more serious. Captain Mitchell remained perfectly still during Whoopi's mocking. His military training had taught him to endure much worse than words. He had faced actual danger, real threats to his safety and the safety of others. But something about this public humiliation on live television, in front of millions of people, cut deeper than he expected. The medallion she was mocking represented 15 years of his life. It represented the time he had thrown himself in, front of a car that had jumped the curb during a royal parade, saving 3 tourists. It represented the night he had stayed at his post during a terrorist threat, even though his wife was giving birth to their first child. It represented countless hours of training, sacrifice, and dedication that most people would never understand. But he didn't interrupt. He didn't defend himself. He simply sat there, maintaining the dignity that had been drilled into him since his first day of service. The camera caught every micro-expression, every subtle shift in his posture. Viewers at home were starting to feel uncomfortable watching this decorated veteran being mocked on national television. Whoopi, oblivious to the growing tension, kept going. "I mean, seriously, what do you actually do all day? Stand there and try not to blink? Ooh, so challenging. No wonder they need to give out participation trophies." She laughed again, but this time it sounded forced, hollow. The studio audience was now completely silent. Even the crew members behind the cameras were exchanging worried looks. The segment was supposed to end in 2 minutes, but it felt like time had slowed down. Every second stretched out uncomfortably. Captain Mitchell finally moved. He reached up slowly and touched the medallion with his fingertips. It was a gentle gesture, almost protective. When he looked back at Whoopi, his eyes held a weight that hadn't been there before. The camera captured it all, the slight tremor in his jaw, the way his shoulders squared almost imperceptibly. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice steady despite everything. "Would you like to know how I earned this medal?" Something in his tone made Whoopi pause. For the first time since the mocking began, she seemed to realize that maybe she had crossed a line. But she was in too deep now, with cameras rolling and millions watching. She couldn't back down without losing face. "Sure," she said, trying to sound casual but not quite managing it. "Enlighten us. What heroic act of standing around earned you that shiny prize?" The studio fell completely silent. Even the usual background sounds, papers rustling, crew members moving equipment, seemed to stop. Everyone was waiting for Captain Mitchell's response, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Captain Mitchell looked directly into the camera for a moment, as if speaking to every viewer individually, then turned back to Whoopi. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, a quiet strength that filled the entire studio. This medallion, he began, touching it gently again, was awarded to me on June 15, 2019. It was a Tuesday, much like today. He paused, gathering his thoughts. That morning started like any other. I was assigned to the morning watch at Buckingham Palace. The tourists were already gathering, taking pictures, hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal family. Whoopi's smirk was beginning to fade. Something about his tone, the way he spoke with such careful precision, made her realize this wasn't going to be the light response she expected. At approximately 10:30 a.m., I noticed a man in the crowd acting strangely. He kept checking his watch, looking around nervously, and he had a large backpack that he clutched tightly to his chest. Captain Mitchell's eyes grew distant, as if he was seeing that day again. My training kicked in. We're taught to notice these things, the little details that might mean nothing or might mean everything. The studio was absolutely silent now. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, afraid to make any noise that might interrupt this moment. I alerted my fellow guards through our communication system, but I couldn't leave my post to investigate directly. Protocol required me to maintain my position unless given direct orders to move. So I watched and waited. His jaw tightened, slightly. The man moved closer to the palace gates, where a group of schoolchildren were gathered with their teacher for a field trip. Whoopi shifted uncomfortably in her chair. This wasn't going where she had expected at all. At 10:47 a.m., the man reached into his backpack. Captain Mitchell's voice remained steady, but his knuckles whitened slightly as he gripped the arm of his chair. I saw the flash of metal. At that moment, I had a choice to make. I could follow protocol, stay at my post, and wait for backup. Or I could act. The weight of his words settled over the studio like a heavy blanket. Even Whoopi seemed to understand that she was hearing something important, something real. I chose to act, he continued. I left my post, which is a serious breach of protocol under normal circumstances, and I ran toward the man. The distance was about 50 yards. It felt like 50 miles. Captain Mitchell paused, his breathing slightly deeper now. As I ran, I could see the children laughing and taking pictures. Their teacher was pointing at the palace, explaining its history. They had no idea what was happening just a few feet away from them. The camera captured every detail of his face, the slight tremor in his lip, the way his eyes focused on something beyond the studio walls. This wasn't a rehearsed story or a publicity stunt. This was raw, honest memory. When I reached him, I could see what he was holding. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a homemade explosive device, crude but potentially deadly. He was fumbling with some kind of trigger mechanism. Captain Mitchell's voice dropped lower. I had seconds to make another choice. Whoopi found herself leaning forward, completely, drawn into the story despite herself. Her co-hosts were equally transfixed, all thoughts of commercial breaks and time constraints forgotten. I tackled him to the ground. The device went flying and landed about 10 feet away from the group of children. During the struggle, he managed to activate it partially. There was a small explosion, mostly smoke and debris, but it could have been so much worse. Captain Mitchell touched his left arm unconsciously. I sustained some injuries from the blast, and from fighting with him, but the children were safe. The studio remained silent, but the silence had changed. It was no longer uncomfortable or tense. It was respectful, almost reverent. The police arrived within minutes and took him into custody. Later investigation revealed that he had been planning this attack for months. He wanted to hurt innocent people to make some kind of political statement. Captain Mitchell looked back at Whoopi. The children went home to their families that night. Their teacher sent me a card later, with drawings from each of the students, thanking me for keeping them safe. Whoopi's earlier confidence had completely evaporated. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. This medallion, Captain Mitchell said, touching it one final time, represents those children's safety. It represents the choice to put others before myself, even when it meant breaking protocol and risking my career. It represents the belief that some things are worth fighting for, worth protecting, even if you're just someone who stands around looking pretty in a fancy hat. The silence stretched on, but Captain Mitchell wasn't finished. He could see the impact his words were having, not just on Whoopi, but on everyone in the studio. The camera operators, the producers, even the audience members were completely still, hanging on his every word. But that's not the whole story, he continued, his voice taking on an even more personal tone. You asked what I do all day standing there in my fancy hat. You asked about the bravery required for such a job. He shifted slightly in his chair, and for the first time since the interview began, his perfect military posture relaxed just a bit. It was as if he was allowing himself to be more human, more vulnerable. 2 years before that incident, I was assigned to a different kind of duty. We don't just guard buildings and ceremonies, you see. We also provide security for royal family members during their public appearances. I was part of the detail protecting Prince Harry during his visit to a children's hospital in Manchester. Whoopi found herself genuinely listening now, her earlier smugness completely gone. She had built her career on reading people, and she could tell this man was sharing something deeply personal. There was a little girl there, maybe 7 years old, named Emma. She had been battling leukemia for 3 years. When Prince Harry walked into her room, her face lit up like nothing I had ever seen before. She had been so weak, so tired from all the treatments, but suddenly she was animated and excited. Captain Mitchell's eyes grew soft as he spoke. Emma noticed my uniform, my medallion, the same one you were asking about. She asked her mother what it meant. Her mother explained that I was there to keep everyone safe, to protect them. The studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed loud. Even Whoopi's co-hosts were leaning forward, completely absorbed in the story. Emma looked at me with these huge brown eyes and said, "Thank you for keeping the prince safe so he could come visit me." Then she asked if she could touch my medallion for luck. I bent down so she could reach it, and she held it in her tiny hand for a long moment. Captain Mitchell paused, his voice becoming slightly rougher with emotion. Emma passed away 6 weeks later. Her mother sent me a letter afterward telling me that Emma had talked about meeting the brave soldier with the shiny medal every day until she died. She said it gave Emma hope, made her feel safer somehow, knowing there were people whose job it was to protect others. The impact of his words was visible throughout the studio. Several audience members were wiping their eyes. Even some of the crew members behind the cameras were visibly moved. That little girl taught me something important about what we do, Captain Mitchell continued. It's not about the standing still or the ceremonies or even the medals. It's about being a symbol of safety and protection for people who need to believe that such things exist in the world. He looked directly at Whoopi again, but there was no accusation in his eyes, no anger, just a quiet sadness. Every day when I put on this uniform, I think about Emma. I think about those school children. I think about all the people who look at guards like me and feel a little bit safer, a little bit more protected. We're not just decoration or tradition. We're a promise that someone is watching, someone is ready to act when needed. The weight of his words settled over everyone. Whoopi realized that she had completely misjudged not just this man but what he represented. Her mocking had been based on surface impressions, on assumptions about pomp and ceremony that had no basis in reality. The bravery you asked about, Captain Mitchell said, isn't just about the dramatic moments, the explosions and tackles. It's about showing up every day, knowing that at any moment you might be called upon to make the ultimate sacrifice for complete strangers. It's about standing perfectly still for hours, staying alert and ready, because that stillness represents stability and security for everyone around you. He touched his medallion one last time. This piece of metal represents every day I've chosen to put others first, every time I've missed a family dinner because duty called, every holiday I've spent at my post instead of home, every moment I've had to be strong so others could feel safe. The studio remained silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the silence of respect, of understanding, of people realizing they had witnessed something profound. Whoopi sat motionless, the full weight of her earlier mockery settling in around her like a heavy coat she couldn't remove. The silence in the studio was deafening. For what felt like an eternity, nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody even seemed to breathe. The weight of Captain Mitchell's words hung in the air like a physical presence, touching every person in that room. Whoopi stared at him, her mouth slightly open as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. For someone who had made a career out of never being at a loss for words, this was uncharted territory. Her hands, usually animated and expressive, lay motionless in her lap. The camera caught everything, the way her confident posture had crumbled, the way her eyes had lost their mocking glint and filled with something that looked like regret. Her co-host sat frozen beside her, uncertain whether to intervene or let the moment play out. Captain Mitchell hadn't moved since finishing his story. He sat with the same perfect posture he had maintained throughout the entire interview, but now it didn't look stiff or formal. It looked dignified, noble even. The medallion on his chest caught the studio lights, but now instead of seeming gaudy or overdone, it gleamed with a quiet honor that everyone could feel. Finally, Whoopi found her voice. It came out smaller than usual, lacking its typical boldness. I didn't know, she said quietly. The words seemed inadequate, almost laughably insufficient given what had just transpired. Most people don't, Captain Mitchell replied gently. There was no condescension in his voice, no "I told you so" attitude. He simply stated it as a fact. We don't do our job for recognition or understanding. We do it because it needs to be done. Whoopi shifted in her chair, clearly struggling with how to respond. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every second of this unprecedented moment on live television. Viewers across America were witnessing something they had never seen before. Whoopi Goldberg, the fearless host who had interviewed presidents and challenged celebrities, completely humbled. "The children you saved," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever see them? Do they know what you did for them?" Captain Mitchell smiled for the first time during the entire interview. It was a small, sad smile that somehow made him look both older and younger at the same time. "No, they don't know. And that's how it should be. They got to go home to their families that day thinking it was just another fun school trip. That's the real victory." The audience was completely still. Some people were crying openly now, moved by the raw honesty of the moment. Others sat with their hands pressed to their mouths as if afraid that any sound might break the spell that had settled over the studio. "I owe you an apology," Whoopi said suddenly, the words bursting out of her as if she couldn't hold them back any longer. "A huge apology. What I said was wrong, it was cruel, and it was based on complete ignorance." She leaned forward in her chair, facing him directly. "I made assumptions about you, about what you do, about what that medallion represents. And I was wrong about all of it. Completely, utterly wrong." Captain Mitchell nodded slowly. "Apology accepted," he said simply. "But you don't owe me an apology. You owe one to every person who has ever worn a uniform in service of others. Every police officer, firefighter, soldier, and guard who has ever been dismissed as just someone who stands around." The camera zoomed in on Whoopi's face. Her usual makeup couldn't hide the genuine emotion written there. Shame, regret, and a dawning understanding of the magnitude of her mistake. "You're right," she said, her voice growing stronger as she found her footing again. "I am sorry. To all of them. To anyone watching who has ever served, who has ever put their life on the line for strangers, who has ever sacrificed for the greater good. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." The studio remained silent, but now it felt different again. It felt like a moment of healing, of understanding, of growth. The audience seemed to sense that they were witnessing something rare and powerful, a genuine moment of accountability on live television. Captain Mitchell reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small photograph. It was worn around the edges, clearly handled many times. He held it up so Whoopi could see it. "This is Emma," he said softly. "The little girl I told you about. Her mother gave me this picture after the funeral. She wanted me to have it because Emma had talked so much about meeting me." Whoopi looked at the photo and her composure finally broke completely. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she saw the image of a beautiful little girl with huge brown eyes, and a bright smile, the same eyes that had looked at Captain Mitchell's medallion with such wonder and hope. The photograph of Emma changed everything. As Whoopi looked at the smiling face of the little girl who had found hope in a stranger's kindness, something fundamental shifted in the studio. The moment transcended television, transcended entertainment, and became something deeply human and real. "She was beautiful," Whoopi whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She wiped her eyes with the tissue that one of the producers had quietly handed her. She was just a baby. Captain Mitchell carefully tucked the photograph back into his pocket, treating it like the precious treasure it was. "Emma taught me that what we do matters, even in the smallest interactions. Especially in the smallest interactions. That little girl will never know she changed my entire perspective on service." The studio audience began to applaud, slowly at first, then building into something powerful and sustained. It wasn't the usual applause for a good joke or entertaining segment. This was something deeper: recognition, respect, gratitude. People were standing, clapping not just for Captain Mitchell but for everyone like him who served quietly and without recognition. Whoopi stood too, her movement prompting the rest of the panel to rise. She looked directly at Captain Mitchell, her eyes still red from crying, and began clapping with genuine reverence. The applause continued for nearly 2 full minutes, an eternity in television time. When the applause finally died down, Whoopi remained standing. "Captain Mitchell," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the studio, "thank you for your service. Thank you for protecting those children. Thank you for honoring Emma's memory. And thank you for teaching all of us something important today." She paused, looking directly into the camera that was broadcasting live to millions of viewers. "I want to say something to everyone watching at home. Today I made a terrible mistake. I mocked something I didn't understand, dismissed someone whose service I knew nothing about. I let my assumptions and prejudices blind me to the truth." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "But Captain Mitchell showed me something beautiful today. He showed me that grace and dignity can triumph over ignorance and cruelty. He showed me that real heroes don't need to defend themselves. Their actions speak louder than any words ever could." The show's time was up, but nobody seemed to care about the schedule anymore. The producers made the decision to let the moment continue, understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Captain Mitchell stood slowly, straightening his uniform one final time. The medallion on his chest caught the light. But now everyone in the studio saw it differently. It wasn't just a piece of metal anymore. It was a symbol of sacrifice, of bravery, of love for strangers, of promises kept in the darkest moments. "Thank you for having me on your show," he said, formally, but his eyes were warm. "And thank you for listening to what I had to say. Sometimes the most important conversations happen when we least expect them." As he prepared to leave the stage, something unexpected happened. Whoopi stepped forward and offered her hand. When he took it, she pulled him into a brief, respectful hug. It was completely off script, completely spontaneous, and completely genuine. "I will never forget this," she whispered, just loud enough for the microphones to pick up. "I will never forget Emma, or you, or what you taught me today." Captain Mitchell nodded and walked off the stage with the same quiet dignity he had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. The audience applauded again as he left, but he didn't turn around or wave. He simply walked away, his duty complete. The show ended differently than it ever had before. Instead of the usual upbeat music and cheerful goodbyes, there was a moment of respectful silence. Whoopi looked into the camera one final time. "We'll be right back tomorrow," she said softly. "But I'll never be quite the same after today. And I hope you won't be either." Within hours, clips of the interview were viral across every social media platform. But they weren't being shared for mockery or entertainment. People were sharing them with captions like, "This is what real heroism looks like," and "Never judge someone until you know their story." The hashtag #ThankYouCaptainMitchell began trending worldwide. The interview became a turning point, not just for Whoopi personally, but for how society talks about service members and first responders. It sparked conversations about the sacrifices made by ordinary people doing extraordinary jobs, about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances and about the power of grace in the face of mockery. Captain Mitchell returned to London and to his duties, but his impact on that American television studio, and on everyone who witnessed that remarkable morning, would last forever. In the end, he had done what he always did. He had protected people, teaching them something valuable about courage, dignity, and the quiet heroism that exists all around us, often in the most unexpected places.